With a burnt face amid flames and surrounded by massive waves, the 94-year-old lighthouse keeper desperately fought the fire, ignoring the excruciating pain from molten metal searing his face, and ultimately had to save himself in the icy sea. He survived battles with 2 elements, but couldn't convince doctors he was dying. In this video, I'll tell you 8 stories about the unluckiest deaths of all time. Viewer discretion is advised. On the morning of July 6, 2013, Flight 214 from Seoul to San Francisco was coming in for a landing. 16-year-old friends Yi Meng-yong and Wang Lingjia were eager to touch down after their trans-Pacific flight, looking forward to a summer camp. But as the plane's nose was nearly on the airport grounds, their world flipped upside down. Turned out it had struck a seawall, ripping the fuselage apart. The tail hit the runway, and after a mid-air spin, the landing gear, engines, and fuselage scattered hundreds of meters apart. Witnesses saw a massive fireball above the wreckage, followed by thick black smoke engulfing the fuselage. Emergency slides deployed almost immediately, and terrified yet surviving passengers began escaping the shattered aircraft. However, not everyone could get out. There were 307 people on board. Some were trapped in the wreckage, and others were caught in the fire. All rescue services rushed to the scene. Firefighters and police, despite the deadly risk, managed to pull 5 people from the burning plane. One stewardess even carried a child on her shoulders. But as they were assisting the injured near the burning fuselage, a horrifying call came to emergency services.
Were you on the plane, ma'am?
Yes, I was on the plane.
600 meters from the fuselage, passengers were also in the detached tail section. Those less injured were trying to save the others and pleaded for help.
We've been on the ground, 20 minutes to a half hour. There are people laying on the tarmac with critical injuries, head injuries. We're almost losing a woman here. We're trying to keep her alive.
Still, the Chinese friends were not among them. Wang Lingjia's body was found on the runway. She died on the spot. On the other hand, her friend's fate was even more horrific. Yi Meng-yong was also thrown from the plane, but she survived. Yet, inexplicably, the teenager lay on the ground while rescuers bypassed her until she was run over twice by a vehicle. What's more, firefighters knew she was there and warned the drivers.
There's a body right there, right in front of you.
Yet all of this came to light later when the coroner examined the victims and video from the crash site surfaced. 3 people lost their lives in that disaster. However, the death at the hands, or rather, the wheels of firefighters shocked the world. It remains unclear how those who were supposed to save lives ended up taking one so senselessly. Unfortunately, similar bizarre situations do occur. So, in 1985, in New Orleans, local lifeguards were throwing a party to celebrate a summer without any drownings. Out of 200 guests, about half were lifeguards. So many people were swimming in the pool, with 4 professionals constantly on watch. But when the party ended, they found a man's body in the water. 31-year-old Jerome Moody was fully clothed and hadn't been swimming with the other guests. The autopsy confirmed that he had drowned. However, trying to help can sometimes become a catastrophe for the hero. This happened to a young American who unknowingly dove into hell. On July 20th, 1981, 2 friends, David and Ronald, and their dog Moosey, were exploring the thermal area of Yellowstone. After parking by the road, the men went to look at the hot springs, leaving the dog by the car. They had only walked a few hundred meters when they suddenly heard a loud, pitiful howling. Turning around, the friends saw Moosey had escaped and jumped into a hot spring. It was the Celestine Pool, which the friends likely knew nothing about. David quickly ran to the pool, intending to jump in and save the dog. Other tourists nearby tried to persuade him not to, but David resolutely entered the water and dove headfirst. When he surfaced, it was clear a disaster had happened. David abandoned his attempt to save the dog, made a few desperate strokes toward the shore, and began to sink. Ronald rushed to help him and immediately felt the scalding water burning his legs. Now, what happened to David after they pulled him to the shore was unspeakably horrific. His eyes were completely white, his hair was falling out on its own, and his skin was peeling off along with his clothes. It turned out that David had suffered 3rd-degree burns over his entire body. Essentially, he was boiled alive. The average temperature in the Celestine Pool is 84 degrees Celsius, but it can still be much higher. Moreover, at an altitude of 2,400 meters above sea level, where the Yellowstone thermal area is located, water boils at 92 degrees. So, 24-year-old David Kerwin spent an entire night in agonizing pain and passed away the next morning. Maybe he didn't know the temperature of the pool or didn't think about how it could affect his body. Or perhaps he was just blinded by emotions and bravely tried to save his friend's dog, paying for it with his life. But if people save some animals, they eat others. And sometimes they can exact revenge for their death even after it happens. The next somewhat exotic story happened in Foshan, China. In the summer of 2014, the head chef of a local restaurant, Peng Fan, accepted an order to prepare a rare delicacy. The main ingredient was a cobra. Preparing a dish from a deadly snake requires specific knowledge and skills, similar to preparing the poisonous fugu fish. In 20 minutes, Peng finished the job, served the dish, and began cleaning the work surface. Among the things he needed to throw away was the head of the already cooked cobra. When Peng touched it, the dead reptile's mouth opened and bit his hand, injecting lethal venom. The neurotoxin caused pain, swelling, total paralysis, and ultimately asphyxiation. The restaurant suddenly erupted in chaos, and when medics rushed in, the patrons realized something serious had happened. Within minutes, doctors were already taking a dead body from the kitchen. Peng Fan had an extremely strong reaction to the snake venom and died before the ambulance arrived. Experts explained that even if a snake's head is severed, both parts of its body can reflexively move for about 30 minutes. This tragic coincidence might seem as if the snake exacted revenge on its killer. Nevertheless, the story of a death row inmate, Michael Anderson Sloan, might make you ponder the existence of some cosmic justice. In 1981, a man stood trial in South Carolina. He was 22 years old at the time and was already on parole for armed robbery. This time, Sloan was charged with murder and sexual assault. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death by electric chair. However, 2 years later, Sloan's case was reviewed and his sentence was changed to life imprisonment. The man spent 6 years in prison when suddenly he was back in the spotlight. This time, I don't even know how to describe what happened. Judge for yourselves. Sitting naked on a metal toilet, Sloan was trying to fix his headphones connected to a TV. Suddenly, he bit through the wire and was electrocuted. The coroner confirmed that the man suffered severe burns to his mouth, and his death was ruled an accident. But people still wonder, was Sloan even allowed to have headphones? Could they have enough current to kill a healthy man? Or maybe this is proof of karma. And if that's the case, what could a student from Ukraine have done to make his face explode? In the winter of 2009, in the city of Konotop, Volodymyr Lykonos was relaxing in his room when his family suddenly heard an explosion. Rushing into Volodymyr's room, his mother and brother nearly blacked out because of what they saw. Lykonos was still sitting in front of his computer with his face severely damaged from the explosion. His family immediately called an ambulance, yet the young man died within minutes. When the police arrived, they found white crystals in a small dish and a packet on Volodymyr's desk. It was pretty hard to distinguish them visually. The thing is, one powder was harmless, citric acid, and the other was an explosive. Can you guess which was which? It turned out that Volodymyr liked chewing gum, and to enhance its flavor, he would dip it in citric acid. He was also a chemistry student at the university, so he probably planned some experiments, but for some unknown reason, he confused the similar-looking powders and created explosive gum. The unknown substance reacted with his saliva, and after a mechanical impact, like a tooth hitting another tooth during chewing, it detonated. Experts determined that the explosive on Volodymyr Lykonos' desk was 4 times more powerful than TNT. Unfortunately, the human body is almost incapable of withstanding such powerful physical and chemical processes, so Volodymyr Lykonos had no chance of surviving the explosion. Just as David Kerwin had no chance of surviving the boiling water, and Peng Fan's body couldn't withstand the neurotoxin. But I've saved the most incredible story for last. It's about a man who, though he couldn't cheat nature, fought for his life like a superhero, even though he was dead inside. Literally. At the beginning of December 1755, 14.5 kilometers off the coast of Great Britain, a 94-year-old man named Henry Hall was at work. If you look at satellite images of this place, you won't see even a speck of land because it's so small that only a lighthouse fits on it. Henry Hall was its keeper. On the night of December 2nd, a fire broke out in the tower. The man bravely tried to extinguish the flames alone, and then 2 colleagues joined him. But when Hall looked up to check their progress, molten lead from the lighthouse roof suddenly poured onto him. The metal burned his head, face, neck, and chest. Despite the horrific burns, Hall continued to help his colleagues. Eventually, the fire proved too strong, and the 3 keepers had to retreat. Fortunately, there was a small cave on one side of the rock where the lighthouse stood, sheltering them from the burning debris. They were spotted the next morning by a passing boat, but the rough seas made landing impossible. The keepers were thrown a rope and pulled through the icy water to the boat. The rescue men were taken to the hospital, where Hall, barely able to whisper, told the doctor that molten lead had gone through his mouth into his body. The surgeon dismissed this, believing no one could survive such an ordeal. Besides, Hall, although unwell, remained conscious and was even recovering. That is, until the 6th day after the fire, when he broke out in a cold sweat. His body seized with spasms, and he passed away. When the doctor performed the autopsy, he found a piece of lead weighing 208 grams in Hall's stomach. The molten metal, still on display in a museum, had burned him from the inside. By some miracle, he lived for 5 days, trying to convince the doctor that he was dying. Most people don't even realize which moments may be their last. When 50-year-old Alex Mitchell from Norfolk came home from work during lunch, he had no idea he would create one of the greatest medical mysteries in the world. The man turned on his favorite comedy show and laughed uncontrollably for about half an hour until he suddenly dropped dead. Doctors couldn't find a cause for his death, and headlines around the world proclaimed, "Laughter kills." Mitchell's grieving widow later wrote to the stars of the show, thanking them for making her husband's last moments so enjoyable. It wasn't until 2012 that the mystery of Alex Mitchell's death seemed to be solved. His granddaughter suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, and she was diagnosed with long QT syndrome. This condition causes a temporary disruption in the heart's rhythm during intense physical or emotional stress, like fear or uncontrollable laughter. Doctors suspected that the condition was hereditary and caused Alex Mitchell's death. I like to believe he was a good man, and that's why he left this world not in pain, but with laughter. If, after watching this video, you start believing in karma, determinism, or divine providence, don't rush to be scared. If these things truly exist, they work both ways. To see for yourself, check out the video about how people manage to cheat death in utterly hopeless situations.